Hello friends, please like and subscribe to the channel and enjoy the stories. Chapter 1. The Letters in the Attic. The old house on Lavender Street had stood for nearly a century, its wooden beams whispering secrets of lives long past. It wasn't a grand estate, but rather an unassuming home, hidden beneath the shade of two sprawling oak trees. It was here, on an unusually warm March morning, that Isla Graham found herself exploring the attic of her late grandmother's house. Dust motes floated in the sunlight streaming through the narrow window. The air was thick with the scent of cedarwood and thyme. Illa pushed aside boxes of faded photographs and brittle newspaper clippings. Her fingers grazed something smooth and cold, a metal lockbox, tarnished with age. It wasn't the kind of discovery she expected. The box was heavy, and its lock was surprisingly sturdy for something so old. With a screwdriver and a bit of determination, she pried it open. Inside was a neat stack of letters, each sealed with crimson wax and addressed to someone named Gabriel Laurent. The name tugged at her memory, faint and elusive. Gabriel Laurent, her grandmother had spoken of him only once, in a fleeting conversation that felt more like a confession. Isla unfolded the first letter, her pulse quickening as she began to read. "Dearest Gabriel," it began. The handwriting was graceful, almost musical, and undoubtedly her grandmother's. The letters told a story Isla could hardly believe. Her grandmother Eleanor had been in love with a man who wasn't her husband. Gabriel was a French artist she had met in the summer of 1957 while traveling through Provence. The letters were brimming with passion, longing, and a kind of heartbreak Isla had only read about in novels. What caught her attention was the abrupt ending. The final letter was dated September 3rd, 1957. Eleanor wrote, "Gabriel, I cannot explain what I've done, but I will never forgive myself. The truth is buried now, as it should be. Please forget me." Isla's hands trembled as she turned the letter over, hoping for more, but the back was blank. She checked the other letters for clues, but nothing revealed the nature of her grandmother's guilt. The truth was buried. But where? Ila's curiosity consumed her. That evening, she began searching online for Gabriel Laurent. She found little, a few mentions of his art in obscure galleries and a photograph of a painting titled La Promesse. The painting was hauntingly beautiful, depicting a young woman sitting by a lavender field, her face half hidden in shadow. Her breath caught in her throat. The woman in the painting was Eleanor. Chapter 2. The Promised Shadow. The discovery of the painting sent Isla spiraling into obsession. La Promesse wasn't just a work of art, it was a window into her grandmother's past, a past that seemed to contradict everything Isla thought she knew. The woman in the painting had an expression Isla couldn't place: hope, despair, or perhaps both tangled together. She found that the painting was displayed in a small gallery in Paris, listed under a private collection. Gabriel Laurent's name was mentioned in passing as an enigmatic artist who vanished in the late 1950s. That mystery only deepened Isla's resolve. The decision came quickly and without hesitation. By the following week, Isla had booked a flight to Paris. Paris was as enchanting as Isla had always imagined, though her focus left little room for its romance. The gallery was tucked away in the Le Marais district, its cobblestone streets lined with ivy-covered buildings. The curator, a wiry man named Jacques, greeted her with mild curiosity. "La Promesse?" he repeated, his French accent curling around the words. "Ah, yes, a remarkable piece. Are you a collector?" "Not exactly," Isla said, fumbling with her words. I'm almost certain the woman in the painting is my grandmother." Jacques' eyebrows lifted in intrigue. "Fascinating. I've always wondered about her identity." The artist refused to speak of her, though his other works hinted at a profound love and sorrow. "His other works?" Isla leaned in. Jacques led her to a dimly lit back room. There, several smaller paintings hung on the walls, each marked by Gabriel Laurent's signature. One showed a field of lavender at dusk, its horizon glowing with an ominous red light. Another depicted two hands reaching for each other across a dark void. And then there was one that stopped Isla cold. It was a portrait of a locket, open to reveal a photograph of Eleanor and a man she didn't recognize. Beneath it, the words "Il sait tout," were scrawled in bold strokes. "He knows everything," Isla whispered, translating the phrase. Jacques nodded. "There are theories among collectors and art historians. Some believe Gabriel was painting not only his own pain, but a shared secret, something he carried with him until he disappeared." The words stirred something deep in Isla, and she couldn't leave without knowing more. Jacques mentioned a woman named Margot, a retired art historian who had once met Gabriel Laurent and studied his works extensively. Margot lived on the outskirts of Paris in a quaint cottage surrounded by wildflowers. She welcomed Isla warmly, her age-worn hands trembling slightly as she poured tea. Gabriel was, how do I say it, a man of many shadows, Margot began. When I met him, he was already retreating from the world, but he spoke of a woman he called his ange brisé, his broken angel. He never said her name. Isla hesitated, then asked, "Did he ever mention what happened to her?" Margot's gaze grew distant. He spoke of betrayal, of a choice she made that changed everything. But he also said he forgave her, even if she never forgave herself. The conversation left Isla with more questions than answers. She stayed up late that night, staring at photographs of the paintings she had taken at the gallery. And then she noticed it, something she had missed before. In the corner of La Promesse, beneath Gabriel's signature, was a series of numbers faintly etched into the paint. 43.8729, 5.3969. Coordinates. Isla's heart raced as she plugged them into her phone. The location was in Provence, near a small village surrounded by lavender fields. It was the place where Gabriel and Eleanor had met. The next morning, Isla boarded a train south, her mind swirling with anticipation and unease. When she arrived in the village, it felt as though time had stopped. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with the scent of lavender. The coordinates led her to a crumbling stone chapel on the outskirts of the village. Ivy crept up its walls, and the wooden doors hung slightly ajar. Inside, the sunlight filtered through broken stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. At the center of the chapel was a small wooden box, worn and unassuming. Isla opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, the handwriting unmistakably Gabriel's. "Eleanor," it began, "if you have found this, then perhaps you've come to seek the truth. I forgive you, but the past cannot be undone. What you buried here will always remain. You chose your path, and I chose mine. But know this, I loved you until the end." Beneath the letter was a folded piece of fabric. As Isla unfolded it, she gasped. It was a blood-stained handkerchief embroidered with the initials GL, and that was when Isla saw it, etched faintly into the stone beneath the box. A second set of initials, E.G., her grandmother's. Chapter 3. Shadows Beneath the Lavender. Isla stared at the initials, her mind racing. Eleanor Graham, her grandmother, had been here. Whatever truth the chapel held, it was connected to the blood-stained handkerchief, the letters, and the haunting paintings. But the final piece of the puzzle still eluded her. She traced her fingers over the stone floor, feeling the grooves of the carved initials. Something felt off, a faint vibration, a hollow echo beneath her hand. The chapel floor wasn't solid. Heart-pounding, Isla searched the space until her eyes landed on a loose stone near the altar. She wedged it free, revealing a small compartment below. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. It was Gabriel's. The journal began with sketches, charcoal drawings of Eleanor, the lavender fields, and the chapel itself. Each image was more sorrowful than the last, as if he had captured a descent into despair. Then came the words. July 15th, 1957. Eleanor arrived today, radiant as ever. She speaks of her husband with a certain detachment, but I see the longing in her eyes. She wishes for freedom, for a life that feels wholly her own. I promised her she could find it here, with me. The entries grew more impassioned as the summer unfolded. Gabriel wrote of their stolen moments, their whispered confessions beneath the lavender moonlight. But then the tone shifted. August 23rd, 1957. Eleanor told me everything. I was a fool to think I knew her completely. She is carrying a secret, a burden so heavy it has carved itself into her soul. She begged me not to hate her, but how can I not? She has done the unthinkable. What had she done? Isla's grip on the journal tightened as she turned the pages. The final entries were frantic, the handwriting jagged. September 1st, 1957. She says it was an accident, but I saw the look in her eyes. She came to me covered in blood, the fabric of her dress stained crimson. She swore she had no choice, that he would have destroyed us both. I buried it for her as she asked, but the weight of what we've done will haunt me forever. The journal ended there abruptly. Isla sat back, her breath catching in her throat. Gabriel's words confirmed it. Her grandmother had killed someone. But who? And why? Isla returned to the village, her thoughts a whirlwind. She needed answers, and the only place left to look was the field itself, the lavender expanse where Eleanor and Gabriel had shared their love and buried their secrets. She found the field at sunset, its violet hues deepened by the golden light. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, almost suffocating in its sweetness. Isla walked slowly, scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance. It didn't take long. Near the edge of the field, where the soil turned dark and loose, she found it, a patch of earth that looked different from the rest. It was subtle, but the grass here grew unevenly, as if the ground had been disturbed long ago. With trembling hands, she began to dig. The soil gave way easily, revealing a wooden box wrapped in decaying fabric. Isla hesitated, her heart pounding, before prying it open. Inside was a gold locket, its chain tangled and rusted. She opened it carefully, revealing two photographs, one of Eleanor, young and smiling, and the other of a man Isla didn't recognize. He was handsome, with sharp features and piercing eyes. Beneath the locket lay a folded piece of paper. "Eleanor," it read, "I forgive you for what you've done, but you must understand. I cannot forgive myself. We were complicit, bound by a moment of desperation. I only hope that when you read this, you'll find peace in knowing the truth is safe with me." The letter was signed with two initials, GL, and beneath it, scrawled in faint, hurried handwriting, were the words, "He deserved it." As Isla stood in the fading light, the weight of her discovery pressed heavily on her. Her grandmother and Gabriel had killed someone, a man whose name was now lost to time. But why? The answers lay buried in the past, tangled in a love that had burned too brightly and too briefly. Isla looked out over the lavender field, the scent of the flowers mingling with the metallic tang of unearthed soil. For a moment, she thought she heard a whisper, soft, like a breeze through the trees. Let it go. But Isla knew she couldn't. The truth had been buried long enough. Chapter 4. The Echo of Ashes. The field was silent except for the sound of Isla's shallow breaths. The letter and the locket felt heavier in her hands than they had any right to be. She stood frozen, staring down at the opened box, her mind circling the same questions. Who was he? Why did he deserve it, and why was my grandmother a part of this? As the sun dipped below the horizon, Isla carefully reburied the box, marking the spot with a small cluster of stones. She wasn't ready to leave the field, but staying longer felt impossible. The weight of the place pressed against her chest, a force too strong to resist. When she returned to her small rented room in the village, she sat with the locket and letter spread out before her, illuminated by the faint glow of a desk lamp. She traced the face of the man in the photograph, committing his features to memory. Something about him felt familiar, but she couldn't place why. The answer came later that night. Sleep eluded her, and so Isla found herself scrolling through archived newspaper articles on her laptop, sifting through the limited historical records of the village. She searched for anything connected to 1957, Gabriel Laurent, or unexplained disappearances. It was nearly midnight when she found it. The headline read, "Local heiress weds, brother disappears days later." The article described the wedding of Vivienne Laurent, a wealthy woman from the area, to a prominent French politician. Mentioned only in passing was her younger brother, Gabriel Laurent, the black sheep of the family. According to the article, Gabriel's artistic pursuits had long been a source of embarrassment to the family. But the real revelation came at the bottom of the page. Unrelated to the ceremony, local authorities are still investigating the disappearance of Henri Marchand, a close associate of the Laurent family. Witnesses claim Marchand was last seen arguing with Gabriel Laurent outside a cafe on August 31st, 1957. Authorities suspect foul play. Henri Marchand. Isla's blood ran cold. She recognized the name, though it wasn't from the articles or her recent discoveries. It was from a letter her grandmother had written years ago, a simple note of condolences sent to a friend. The connection hit her like a thunderclap. Henry Marchand had been close to her grandmother, too. Ela spent the next day unraveling the thread. Conversations with elderly villagers revealed whispers of a scandal involving Henry. He was said to be a ruthless man who exploited his wealth and influence to get what he wanted. One woman, a shopkeeper named Delphine, spoke in hushed tones when Isla mentioned his name. Henry was cruel, Delphine said. He thought himself untouchable. There were rumors about what he did to women, to your grandmother perhaps. People don't talk about it anymore, but back then, everyone knew he had a temper. The implications sank into Ela like stones. If Henry had hurt her grandmother, it could explain everything. Her guilt, Gabriel's anguish, and the act of violence that had bound them together. But it wasn't enough. Isla needed proof. The final clue came unexpectedly. That evening, while walking through the village, she passed a weathered stone marker near the edge of the lavender field. It bore an inscription in French, "For the forgotten who sleep beneath the earth." A chill ran down her spine. The marker was old, but the ground around it seemed disturbed. Digging here felt impossible without attracting attention, so Isla took a photograph of the marker and returned to her room. She searched the phrase online, hoping for some local historical context. What she found instead was a faded police report, part of an old archive. The report confirmed Henry Marchand's disappearance, but added one damning detail. Witnesses claimed to have seen Gabriel Laurent and a woman matching Eleanor's description arguing with Henry near the field the night he vanished. The final line of the report struck like lightning. Partial remains recovered from the field suggest foul play, though identification is inconclusive. Case remains unsolved. The truth was undeniable now. Henry Marchand had been killed in the lavender field. The partial remains explained the unease in the earth where Isla had dug, and the locket's inscription, "He deserved it," seemed to echo her grandmother's justification. But Gabriel and Eleanor had lived with the weight of their crime, unable to escape its shadow. And now, that shadow had found Isla. The next morning, Isla stood again in the field, the locket clutched tightly in her hand. She thought of Eleanor and Gabriel, two people whose love had burned so brightly it consumed them. She thought of Henry Marchand, whose cruelty had led to his death. As the wind stirred the lavender, Isla made a decision. She knelt by the stone marker and placed the locket atop it, letting the weight of the past settle there. "Let this be enough," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a figure standing at the edge of the field, half hidden in shadow. It was a man, his features sharp and piercing, his eyes unmistakable. The man from the locket. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. Chapter 5. The Phantom in the Lavender. Isla froze, her pulse roaring in her ears. She scanned the field for the man she'd just seen, the one from the photograph in the locket. But the lavender swayed undisturbed in the breeze, and the edge of the field stood empty. "I'm imagining things," she told herself, but the air around her felt heavier, charged with an almost electric tension. She left the field quickly, her footsteps crunching against the gravel path. Yet no matter how far she walked, the image of the man's piercing eyes lingered in her mind. It wasn't possible. Henry Marchand was dead. Wasn't he? Back in the safety of her room, Isla replayed the events of the past few days. The letters, the locket, Gabriel's journal, and now the specter of a man she'd seen only in photographs. The pieces didn't fit together. If Henry had truly been buried in the field, why hadn't the police conclusively identified the remains? Her thoughts turned to Gabriel Laurent. If anyone had known the truth, it was him. His journal hinted at guilt, but also fear. Fear of the very secret Ela was now unraveling. Determined to uncover more, she decided to visit the last known residence of Gabriel Laurent, an address she had found scribbled in the margins of his journal. It was a crumbling chateau on the outskirts of the village, long abandoned but still standing as a relic of another time. The chateau was a ghost of its former self. Ivy climbed its stone walls, and its windows stared out like hollow eyes. Inside, the air was damp, and the floor creaked with every step. Isla wandered through rooms filled with dust-covered furniture and faded portraits. In what must have been Gabriel's studio, she found an easel still holding a half-finished painting. The colors had faded, but the image was unmistakable, a dark figure standing in a field of lavender, their face obscured. Beneath the easel lay a trunk, its lid slightly ajar. Inside were more sketches, most of them of Eleanor. But one caught Isla's attention immediately. It was a detailed drawing of Henri Marchand, his expression contorted in anger. Scrawled in the corner were the words, "He's still watching." A chill ran down Isla's spine. She flipped through the rest of the sketches, her hands trembling. The final drawing was the most disturbing. It showed a pair of hands reaching out of the ground, clawing at the surface. As she left the chateau, the sky darkened, and a sudden storm rolled in. Rain pelted the earth, turning the path back to the village into mud. Isla's thoughts churned as violently as the weather. Who was Henri Marchand to her grandmother? And why did Gabriel believe he was still watching? That night, Ila lay awake, unable to shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. The faintest creak of the floorboards outside her room made her sit bolt upright. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. No answer. She crept to the door and opened it, peering into the dimly lit hallway. It was empty. Yet as she turned back into her room, she saw it, etched into the condensation on the windowpane. "You found me!" Her scream shattered the silence. The next morning, she went straight to Delphine, the shopkeeper. Isla recounted everything, the locket, the marker in the lavender field, the strange apparition. Delphine listened, her face pale. "I told you Henri was cruel," Delphine said finally. "But what I didn't say is that people still speak of him. Not as a man, but as a presence. Those who wander the lavender fields at night have claimed to see him. Some say his spirit can't rest because of what was done to him." "You think he's haunting the field?" Isla asked, though the question felt absurd even as she said it. "I think," Delphine said carefully, "that some secrets refuse to stay buried." That evening, Isla returned to the lavender field one last time. She stood by the marker, the locket heavy in her hand. "I don't know what happened to you," she said aloud, her voice trembling, "but I think you deserve to rest." She placed the locket on the ground and turned to leave. But before she could take a step, a shadow moved among the lavender. The figure emerged slowly, stepping into the pale moonlight. It was him, the man from the photograph. "Who are you?" Ela whispered, her heart pounding. The man didn't answer. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he faded into the lavender, leaving only the faint echo of his voice. "You were never supposed to find this." Chapter 6. Rest for the Unquiet. The figure's words echoed in Isla's mind long after he had disappeared into the lavender. You were never supposed to find this. They were not a warning, nor a threat. They sounded almost regretful. Illa stood rooted to the spot, her heart thundering in her chest. The field was quiet now, the lavender swaying gently in the breeze. The weight of everything she'd uncovered pressed heavily on her, but beneath it all was a new feeling. Determination. If I wasn't supposed to find it, then why did it call to me? Back in her room, Ela reviewed everything. The journal, the photographs, and the letters. The connections she'd made weren't enough. She needed closure, and she knew exactly where to find it. Beneath the marker in the lavender field. The following day, she returned to the field with a small spade and began digging where the stone marker stood. The ground was softer than she expected, as though it had been disturbed recently. After a few feet, her spade hit something hard. She knelt down and brushed away the dirt with her hands until she uncovered a wooden box, sealed tightly. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, taking a deep breath, she pried it open. Inside was a stack of letters bound with twine, their edges yellowed with age. At the very top was a photograph of Eleanor and Gabriel, arms entwined, their smiles radiant. But it was the man standing behind them that caught Ela's attention. Henri Marchand. Unlike the couple, Henry's expression was grim, almost menacing. Beneath the photograph were the letters, written in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. Isla unfolded the first and began to read. August 15, 1957, Gabriel. I fear what Henry might do. He knows about us, and he knows my secrets. He's threatened to ruin me, to tell my husband everything. But it's not just my reputation at stake. It's my safety. Henry has always taken what he wanted without asking. He's dangerous, Gabriel. If he comes near me again, I don't know what I'll do. The next letter was darker, the ink smudged as though written in a hurry. August 31st, 1957. Gabriel, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. I swear it was an accident. He came to the field, demanding money, threatening me. When I refused, he grabbed me. I pushed him. I didn't know the rock was there. He hit his head, and the blood... There was so much blood. You were right, the police would never believe me. They would say it was deliberate. Please, help me. You're the only one I can trust. The final letter was unsigned, written in Gabriel's hand. Eleanor, I buried him where you asked. No one will find him, not truly. But this is not a solution, only a burden we will carry for the rest of our lives. I forgive you for what happened, but I cannot forgive myself for what I have done to protect you. You are my light, Eleanor, but this darkness will follow us always. The truth was devastating. Henry Marchand had died by Eleanor's hand, and Gabriel had helped her cover it up. The story of their love had been one of passion, but also of desperation and guilt. Isla carefully returned the letters to the box and reburied it beneath the marker. As the sun set over the lavender field, Isla stood in silence, letting the weight of her discovery sink in. She had solved the mystery that had haunted her grandmother's life, but it had come at a cost. A faint breeze stirred the lavender, carrying with it the faintest whisper, "Thank you." Isla turned toward the sound, her eyes scanning the horizon. For a brief moment she thought she saw two figures standing at the edge of the field. Gabriel and Eleanor, hand in hand, their faces serene. And then they were gone, leaving Isla alone beneath the fading light. As she walked back to the village, the air felt lighter, as though the weight of the past had finally been lifted. The lavender swayed gently behind her, a field of secrets that could finally rest. Weeks later, Isla returned home, carrying with her the locket and a single photograph of Eleanor and Gabriel. She placed the items on her mantle, a quiet tribute to the love and tragedy she had uncovered. Though the field remained a part of her memory, she never returned. Some stories, she realized, are meant to stay where they began, woven into the earth, the lavender, and the whispers of the wind. And as for the man she had seen in the field, the one from the photograph, she never saw him again.